Okay, today's Q&A is about Glatt and Beis Yosef. And the question is, what's the difference between Glatt and Beis Yosef? Is it a different hechsher? Is it one better than the other one? What's exactly going on? What's the difference between, I see some meat that's labeled Glatt and some meat is labeled Beis Yosef. So we'll start back with the Gemara that says that if two parts of the animal's lung are attached to each other by some sort of like a mucus, then the animal is considered a treifa. We call those connectors, we call them sirchas, okay? But that's not the whole Gemara. The Gemara says that. The Gemara says more than that. The Gemara says like this. In certain locations, if the sircha is in a certain parts of the lung, the connector between the parts of the lung is in certain spots, the animal is kosher. That's not make it a treifa. Second, the Gemara says, is that if they're in the wrong location, the place where the animal would be a treifa, then the animal should be rejected no matter what it's treif, and there's no way to check the sircha to decide that the animal is kosher. Okay, so one kula, that in certain places it's not a problem at all, and one chumrah, which is that in other places where it is a problem, there is no way to check it. There's nothing you can do to solve it. Now, when the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah bring this Gemara, they bring it very differently. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch basically takes the Gemara at face value, and he says if the sirchas are in those certain locations that the Gemara says, no problem at all. And he says the other thing. He says people have these ideas of how you could check the sircha to make it mutter. He says don't rely on those things because, like the Gemara says, there's no way to check them. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Basically, what the Gemara says. The Ramah says the opposite. He says, we're not such experts to know which parts are exactly the mutter sections or the usher sections, parts of the lung, and therefore, no matter what, wherever the sircha is, it should be usher. So he's being more strict than what the Gemara had said. But he says, yeah, there are ways to check it, and he's willing to tolerate or to accept certain ways of checking sirchas to decide if they're problematic or they're not problematic. So over these generations, what's happened is that Sephardim and Ashkenazim basically have two different types of meat. Sephardim will allow sirchas in certain locations, where Ashkenazim will not. They say that sircha, that doesn't make a difference, like the Gemara says. And in the places where there are issues, they don't let any methods of checking the sirchas. They say no matter how you check it, no matter what you're going to do, if it's there, the animal is considered to be treif. And the Ashkenazim were the opposite. They were more weary of these sirchas in these different spots. They said any sircha in any spot is no good, but they use methods of checking to decide that an animal is kosher. So what's happened is that meat that was completely free of sirchas, not any sirchas at all, any place, was called glatt or chalak. Both of those, that's a Yiddish or a Hebrew word that means smooth, and it means that the lung was smooth with no sirchas on it at all, and it was mutter, you didn't have to check it at all. And that was like more muhudar. It's a better kind of a meat. It had no sirchas at all. And other people would have called that meat Beis Yosef meat because it meets the standard that the Beis Yosef, meaning the author of the Shulchan Aruch, that the Beis Yosef would have accepted. Okay, so this meat, that's what people refer to, that most Ashkenazim ate meat that was not Glatt or Beis Yosef or Chalak, but when there was special meat that it would have this, they would refer to it by this better standard. Well, starting like maybe 100 years ago, some things about that have changed. The first is that in the United States, most of the shchitas are overseen by Rabbanim who follow Ashkenazi minhagim, so they are machmir about sirchas in places that Sephardim would not have been machmir on. Second is, because of different sociological reasons, they started calling meat glatt, even if it had a few sirchas, okay, which was not the traditional glatt, okay. And what happened is, with time, people who were more careful about the kind of food that they ate, the kosher food that they ate, would use the word glatt to mean truly kosher up to a standard that they wanted to accept it, and they stopped buying any meat that was not glatt. So what's gone on is that nowadays, meat that's labeled glatt is not really the standard, that Sephardim and the Shulchan Aruch would have accepted. It's not that at all. Now the word glatt has a newer meaning. It means maybe it has a couple of sirchas, and it's of a higher kosher standard, higher than the non-glatt, but it's not really what used to be called glatt. So what should Sephardim do if they want to eat meat? The Sephardim are not able to follow those leniencies that the Ashkenazim do. So some hashkachas what they'll do is the meat that's good enough that the Sephardim are allowed to eat, they'll label it Beis Yosef or Chalak to show that it comes from a cow that has no sirchas. Okay, the problem is it's very hard to do that. It's hard to find animals like that, especially because since the hashkacha is essentially an Ashkenazi hashkacha, they're being machmir about some things that the that the Sfardim would have been makel on. I mean, sirchas in certain spots they're going to be machmer on. So it's really hard to find animals that have no sirchas at all, completely free of sirchas. In some South American countries, it is easier to find that the meat from there. But they say that that meat is not the same quality as the American meat, though the customers don't want that. Okay, so that's one way of doing it, is to say we're only going to call it Beis Yosef or Chalak if it has no sirchas at all. Others say completely opposite. They say Beis Chalak, Glatt, Beis Yosef, it all means the same thing. Come on, because really 100 years ago it really did mean the same thing. So they say no matter what, now that we changed the rules for Glatt, and Glatt means even with certain amount of sirchas, you could use the same amount. You could do the same thing and call it Beis Yosef also. Okay, other people are not so excited about that. It seems like that maybe technically that might be, the words might mean the same thing, but it's a deceptive way of marketing things to tell people that quote one Beis Yosef and one Glatt when they're really exactly the same thing. So there's then a third type of hashgacha where they're more selective. The ones with very few sirchas, they call them Glatt. The ones with even less sirchas, they call those Beis Yosef. And somehow there's a little bit of a difference between them. So anyhow, back to where we started. The question was, in many cases, meat that's labeled as Beis Yosef is a higher kashrus standard than the one that's labeled Glatt. But it really very much depends on the hashgacha and what their plans are and their standards are of what they consider, how they label each of those.